Developed by FromSoftware, Elden Ring is a critically acclaimed title that is effectively a successor to the Dark Souls series, inheriting many of its signature features, including the developer's penchant for difficult boss fights. Created in collaboration with George R.R. Martin, a high fantasy author most famous for A Song of Ice and Fire, Elden Ring is known for its deep RPG systems, fascinating open world, nebulous story, and, perhaps most of all, its difficulty. As with many of FromSoftware's most recent offerings, there are plenty of hard boss fights to be found. FromSoftware's Elden Ring finally arrived in February 2022 after years of speculation and hype, a lead-up that repeated itself with the long wait for the release of Shadow of the Erdtree, Elden Ring's first and only DLC, which came out in June 2024. Shadow of the Erdtree ramps up the difficulty, introducing some of the game's toughest bosses and regular enemies alike. With consideration for where they appear in the base game and DLC, these are the 15 hardest bosses players can encounter in Elden Ring.
The first main boss most Elden Ring players will likely face is Marget, the Fell Omen, who guards the entrance to Stormveil Castle and essentially demands that new players hone their skills in order to continue on, a skill checked prior to entering the game's first legacy dungeon. While it's technically possible to bypass Marget, defeating him is required to face Godric the Grafted, one of the game's easier demigods, two of which are required to enter Lindel, royal capital. Marget may not technically be the most difficult boss in Elden Ring, but given how early on he is encountered, he can certainly be pretty tough. The most challenging aspect of his boss fight is the number of delayed attack patterns, maneuvers with tricky timing that many later bosses in the game utilize as well. That makes Marget, while difficult, an excellent introduction to the boss mechanics of Elden Ring.
Romina, Saint of the Bud, is secreted away in the deepest recesses of the Rao ruins. Romina is a giant, partially insectoid enemy, combining biological elements of scorpions, centipedes, butterflies, and humans. She uses her multiple mouths, stingers, and spears to create a confusing blur of damaging strikes. Much like Malenia before her, Romina requires the Tarnished to deal with scarlet rot. She inflicts the deadly status effect rapidly, basically necessitating the use of preserving boluses or some rot-resistant piece of equipment. Although the player has ample time to prepare for an encounter with Romina, she's still a worthy challenge whenever they arrive.
There are two fights against Astel in Elden Ring. The first against Astel, Natural Born of the Void, and the second against Astel, Stars of Darkness. Natural Born of the Void is the final hurdle in Ranni the Witch's questline, but Stars of Darkness appears later in the game, has more HP, and an additional attack. Astel has plenty of magical spells under its belt, and it's capable of launching meteorites, casting gravity magic, and even teleporting. Anyone who gets close to this beast will be ravaged by a shockwave, but keep some distance and the Elden Ring boss will fire a damaging laser beam. With these moves, players will have to battle this creature both at close range and from a distance.
As the player travels to the Land of Shadow in Elden Ring's DLC, they're likely to encounter an NPC named Bo Igon, who furiously curses the name of an unknown nemesis, Babel. Igon points the way to Jagged Peak, an optional region that involves a sustained, treacherous climb of a rocky slope beset by roaring winds and deadly lightning. When they make it to the top, they'll find that Babel is an ancient dragon who once tried to usurp the throne of Placidusax. Babel is tough. He breathes deadly fire at the Tarnished from across the arena, jumps in the air, and slams back down with an incredible damage output. Much as Igon regales the player with tales of his repeated battles against Babel, this fight seems designed to take multiple tries. Defeating him isn't necessary to progress in the game, but is incredibly rewarding. Babel is tied to Igon's questline, and the Drake Warrior can be summoned as an ally against him, finally getting revenge on his eternal enemy.
Players will encounter the Tree Sentinels multiple times throughout their adventures in Elden Ring's Lands Between, but while the most infamous fight stands just outside the game's tutorial area, another particularly fearsome Elden Ring boss guards the back entrance to Lendel, royal capital. Found before a fog gate, the Draconic Tree Sentinel, capital outskirts, is typically a massive challenge relative to almost anything that's come before. Agile, tough to hit, and capable of launching lightning strikes that require almost frame-perfect precision, the Draconic Tree Sentinel boss fight represents a serious barrier to progression, playing a similar role to Marget. Once players get past him, they can enter Lendel, royal capital, an important step on the path to the final boss. After the reintroductory wake-up call provided by Shadow of the Erdtree's first mandatory boss, Divine Beast Dancing Lion, the dungeon ends abruptly, and players are encouraged to seek out Castle Ensis as they continue to follow in Michaela's footsteps. At the end of that much smaller dungeon, they encounter Rana, a former princess of the Carian royal family. She fights with a pair of swords, one made of magical glintstone and the other coated in a roaring fire. The battle against her is reminiscent of the one against Malenia, as she leaps across the battlefield, cutting wide arcs in inscrutable combos. She'll also coat the battlefield with arcane AoEs. Thankfully, there's no Scarlet Rot involved this time. Rana is hard, but the fact that her worst attacks deal fire damage makes it a little easier to mitigate her damage in the long run. That said, she still deals a lot of it, and the length of her combos can be intensely frustrating. She's the first major obstacle to progress in the player's journey towards the Shadow Keep. Ratagon of the Golden Order happens to be the first half of Elden Ring's two-stage final boss fight alongside the Elden Beast. Ratagon's short-ranged melee attacks may seem simple for the most part, but they're also very strong and can get players a headache. In addition to those melee moves, Ratagon can also fire beam projectiles and pull off slam moves, and his attacks are often as difficult to withstand as they are to dodge. It seems a bit counterintuitive that Ratagon would be more difficult than the Elden Beast, which doesn't even crack the top 15, but the latter has attacks that are much easier to dodge, even if the fight does generally take longer. Ratagon leaves very little room for error and punishes mistakes with tremendous damage and devastating combos. Elden Ring's Moog boss is fairly out of the way, and those who don't seek out Var or venture across the consecrated snowfields likely won't find him. He utilizes magical spells that can be easily dodged, but they deal an incredible amount of damage when they connect. It's not until his health is half depleted that he kicks things into high gear and casts an unblockable blood spill across the screen. Moog is one of two bosses players must defeat in order to begin Shadow of the Erdtree. Moog takes on a winged form in the second phase of the fight, giving him more speed. Moreover, his attacks can cover more ground. Moog is certainly not the most difficult optional boss in Elden Ring, and there are ways to cheese the Moog fight, but those who seek him out legitimately ought to be prepared for a fight. Dealing with the Godskin Apostle and Godskin Noble Elden Ring bosses individually can be irritating enough, but dealing with them both in the same fight can make for a terrible experience. In fact, it is arguable that these two are among the most reviled bosses in all of FromSoftware's catalog. Both the Apostle and Noble are very fast, and their speed kicks up a notch when they enter their second phase. They can both shoot projectiles, meaning they often engage the player from different ranges. Worst of all, these Elden Ring bosses must be fought multiple times, as they'll continually resurrect until their whole health bar is completely depleted.
Godfrey became the first Tarnished after being exiled from the Lands Between, but he returns to the Ashen Capital when the player is on the brink of toppling the Golden Order. He's very aggressive in his boss fight, wielding a battle axe that can deal tons of damage. In his first phase, the Elderling boss moves slowly, but his cadence can make him tough to track, and he frequently produces debilitating shockwaves by stomping the ground. Godfrey's second phase sees him reverting to his alter ego, Hurrah Luke's Warrior, a title previously held when he conquered the giants, prior to becoming first Elden Lord. To do this, Godfrey removes Serosh, the Lord of Beasts, from his back, who was suppressing Godfrey's bloodlust so he can act according to his lordship. Now shirtless and coated in blood, Hurrah Lukes shirks his axe, fighting bare-fisted and even more aggressive. Outclassing Ratagon, Godfrey is the toughest boss in Elden Ring's final stretch.
A secret boss encountered only by diligent players in Crumbling Farum Azula, Dragon Lord Placido Sax, has to be the harvest of Elden Ring's many boss dragon enemies. An ancient, towering beast that boasts massive, punishing AoE attacks, this is a tough fight that's overshadowed only by the final boss of Crumbling Farum Azula. Able to fly, teleport, and perform intimidating diving attacks that can be difficult to avoid, Dragon Lord Placido Sax is a worthy endgame Elden Ring boss and can be truly dangerous for characters either slightly underleveled for late game areas or with unoptimized builds.
Malikth the Black Blade is a two-part Elden Ring boss battle that takes place at the end of the Crumbling Farum Azula. The first part involves Maliketh's alter ego, the beast clergyman Goronk, a giant creature with a penchant for firing projectiles and using a lot of area of effect attacks. Once the player gets the beast's health down to around 50%, Goronk is revealed to actually be Elden Ring's Malikth the Black Blade, and shadowbound beast of Queen Marika. Maliketh's prowess extends to Elden Ring lore. He defeated the Gloam-Eyed Queen, the mysterious leader of the Godskin Apostles. Maliketh is much more violent and agile than in the Beast Clergyman phase. He moves around the stage belligerently, unleashing combos that, even if dodged perfectly, can sap a player's entire stamina bar. Additionally, he's able to launch devastating arched projectiles and close the gap between himself and the player almost instantly. Crumbling Farum Azula is arguably the most difficult region in Elden Ring, with Maliketh capping off a grueling set of bosses that includes the Godskin duo and Dragon Lord Placidus.
Found at the bottom of the Halig tree, another long and incredibly taxing area, is Malenia, Blade of Miclea. Her reputation puts her in the highest echelon of difficult FromSoftware bosses, alongside Bloodborne's Orphan of Kos and Dark Souls 3's Sister Friede. Malenia not only crushes players who challenge her, but also devastates the entire region of Caelid, turning it into the wasteland seen in Elden Ring by unleashing the Scarlet Rot in a duel against Radahn during Elden Ring's Shattering. Malenia's first phase is tough, yet manageable. It's her second phase, in which she's transformed into Malenia, Goddess of Rot, that is harrowing. Lightning-fast combos, massive AoE attacks, an onslaught of phantom clones, and a near-inescapable Scarlet Rot combine for a whirlwind of punishing attacks. Worst of all, she can leech health from the player with every hit she lands, which means that some Spirit Ash summons will do more harm than good. Malenia may be an optional boss, just as the entire Halig tree is an optional area, but that doesn't stop her from being the hardest boss fight in the base game.
Much of Shadow of the Erd Tree's plot hinges on claiming Mesmer's flame, which ultimately unlocks the way to the DLC's final dungeon. In doing so, players must go up against Mesmer the Impaler himself, traveling to their base of operations in the Shadowkeep. As the destruction he's wrought across the land of Shadow implies, Mesmer is an incredibly aggressive boss. Even the quickest players can scarcely get a hit in edgewise amid his incessant successions of strikes. Because of his incredible speed, it's best to fight Mesmer at close range, but he won't make that easy. With a combination of short-range spear attacks, long-range fire magic, and devastating aerial strikes, Mesmer can retaliate against any number of different tactics. In case that wasn't enough, Mesmer's attacks are also imbued with fire damage for that little extra bit of oomph.
Not to be outdone by the final boss of the base game, the final boss of Shadow of the Erdtree, Rodon, is the hardest boss in all of Elden Ring. After a thrilling but ultimately fairly easy fight against Radahn in the base game, the Tarnished faces an alternate incarnation of the storied warrior again at the end of the DLC. Now empowered by a demigod, Radahn has two phases, Promised Consort Radahn and Radahn, Consort of Miquella. He has no weaknesses, so there's no way to cheese this fight. It'll be a fair duel between two hardened warriors. Rodon don't pull any punches either. He's an incredibly aggressive boss, and his attack patterns can be difficult to read. Couple that with his massive stature and the simple fact that his attacks do enormous amounts of damage, and Rodon has everything that makes an all-time FromSoft boss hard. He more than earns the honor of most difficult boss in Elden Ring, leaving many a player hopelessly stuck on his final boss fight.